Well, this week I decided to check in on Facebook, which is something I don't do very often. To me, Facebook seems more like a one large grief counselling session. It's where people go to air their woes. It's not like the cut and thrust of Twitter. I know Twitter has a lot of people who hate it because it is a nasty bear pit and it's quite visceral. But from that come a lot of witty quips and asides, the bang, 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 the banter. I kind of like that. I know it's a dark, horrible place at times, but if you can keep a sense of humour and just keep the zingers flying, it's bearable. Whereas Facebook, you try, it's just hand-wringing nonsense. Particularly my Facebook timeline is my wife's Facebook timeline, and all the comments she gets from lovely people. I went here on holiday. I've tried this restaurant. It's really nice. How are you doing? It's all nice cup of tea and a chat. My timeline is full of the end of the world is nigh for whatever reasons. People up on soapboxes and a lazy clickbait sharing. On my Facebook timeline, that lying meme, there's a lot of lying memes, but the one about this is a picture of the House of Commons debating whether welfare should be cut or go up, and there's like about 4 or 5 people in the debating chamber in the House of Commons and go, this is where MPs voting for a pay rise, and it's packed to the rafters, and neither of those photographs are captioned correctly. They're just taken at different times for different debates, nothing to do, but it's a lying lefty meme. And now we're sharing that. That one comes around every so often, along with the head of Nestle doesn't think clean drinking water is a human right, which, again, he never said that. He said something else. He said consuming water for leisure activities and sort of garden hoses and swimming pools was not a human right. Very different. But these memes come round again and again and again on my timeline. And I've accumulated a lot of people over the years from different countries. When you get to my age, you do accumulate a lot of people from work. Now, considering that I used to work in film and TV production, I've accumulated quite a lot of people of a left-wing bent. And for them, the end of the world is nigh. And then I've got the normies normie. A vast majority of my friends are just classic normies, and they will believe anything they read from the mainstream media. Oh my goodness me! This article in the Huffington Post. Oh, that Carl Benjamin. Oh, what a disgusting human being. Oh, clutch my pearls. That kind of thing. They'll believe it all. And so this week, when I decided to visit the funeral parlour that is Facebook, and there was somebody I know, nice person, very nice person, but she shared the link, the snippet. It wasn't even the full interview, it was just a snippet. The one doing the rounds of Boris Johnson saying that for a hobby he likes to make model buses. He said, this cannot be true. How frivolous. Oh my God, he could become Prime Minister. And then she knows a huge amount of really left-wing, socialist people who would lick Ash Sarkar's boots if they got the chance. Some of them, her friends, once accused me of being complicit in murder. Okay, not that I've ever murdered someone, not that I've ever been an accomplice in a murder, nor have I sat in on a discussion where people were discussing murdering another person, at least not seriously. But why am I complicit in murder? Well, because I voted Conservative, and therefore anybody who dies because of austerity cuts is a murder victim. And if you voted the Conservative Party, you are complicit in murder. That was told to my face. I responded with a few colourful Anglo-Saxon metaphors in response. But the thing is, this Boris interview where he said he makes model buses, and they all went into meltdown. This guy, be the end of the world is nigh if he becomes Prime Minister. He makes model buses. And, goodness me, the man has no shame. And he looked befuddled, and he paused. And then I just said, calm down, guys. This is trolling. Boris Johnson is trolling you. Because recently people tried to take him to court over the slogan on the bus, and they got thrown out of court. Wasn't worth anybody's time. The man who took Boris Johnson to court as being found out to be, let's just say, a little bit not so scrupulous in his dealings, and allegations of fiddling expense accounts. But anyway, they believe all this stuff, and I said, no, Boris is trolling you. Okay, he says something like that, and he knows you're going to go into meltdown because he knows you'll never vote for him. Somebody said with Boris Johnson, how dare he say that? He's alienating half the country. I said, no, he's not alienating half the country. He's just alienating a bunch of progressive left-wing, middle-class people in London and some of the university towns. People like you, out of the way. But he's not alienating half the country. And do you have data to back your claim up? But, well, do I have data to back my claim up? But, I said, this is just trolling. Because I said, you guys are never going to vote for him. You would never vote Conservative. Come on, let's face it. Even if they put the beloved Rory Stewart in, you wouldn't vote Conservative at the end of the day. You wouldn't. So let's stop mucking about here, okay? Let's pretend. No, not pretend. Let's just cut the pretense that you are genuinely outraged by Boris Johnson. He could buy a pint of milk in a newspaper on a Sunday morning, and you'd find reason to be outraged by him. So what's the point? But anyway, so much for visiting Facebook this week. But it just highlights that people are in the grip of mainstream media. And one thing that I think Boris is going to do as leader, I don't know if he's going to get the job yet. There are problems with Boris. There are problems with Jeremy Hunt for the role of Conservative Party leader. But I don't think Boris Johnson is going to be in the thrall of the press. And I would like more members of Parliament, more politicians not being in the thrall of the press. And I don't mean just in the United Kingdom. I mean the United States, in Europe, and also the developed world. Don't be in the thrall of the press. They have basically spent the last 30 years specialising in opinion pieces and trying to steer people. They're trying to play kingmaker. And this has been a problem, I think, that's been acutely felt since, say, Rupert Murdoch began his newspaper empire, and latterly a television empire. And I think he set a tone which I think the mainstream media, the television mainstream media, have largely followed. The BBC in particular, I mean, they don't really have reporters and they don't really have journalists fronting things. The four main political interviewers and journalists that they've got, three of them are little more than activists who are always trying to shape a narrative. The fourth being Andrew Neil, who's somebody I don't particularly like. I think some of his methods are old-fashioned and outdated. The constant search for the gotcha and interrupting people and instead of having a discourse. I think that's on the way out. But I would say, on the other hand, Neil never pushes an agenda. He's not trying to manipulate things to push a line. He's just like a terrier, with a bone, sort of wrestling with someone for it. Whereas Andrew Marr is just he's quite poor at what he does. He's not fair. He's not even-handed at all in interviews, especially Victoria Derbyshire, who's little more than an activist. Who has become the pet of a few Labour and other progressive members of Parliament, and Laura Kuenssberg, who's just a tittle-tattle merchant. Everything that Laura Kuenssberg does is like, well, an unnamed source walked past me in a corridor and said this might be happening, but we can't tell when. Yeah, and it's all supposition from Laura Kuenssberg. You have to cut through her kind of gossipy style, and you think, just give me the facts. And we've departed from that. So if Boris Johnson does become leader of the Conservative Party and also Prime Minister of Great Britain, I hope he's going to develop a Teflon-coated government where, whatever the press suppose or smear or a line that they push, he just deflects it, bats it away. Who cares? I'm getting on with the job, and my cabinet are going to get on with the job. I mean, we can but hope. But, it's not all polished turds in the BBC archives. They still do about half a dozen things reasonably well. Um, this morning, I was listening to A Point of View on Radio 4, and it was David Goodhart, who's somebody who I think comes out with some interesting stuff sometimes. I'm not really in political alignment with him, but he does hit the nail on the head every so often. In particular, he's the chap who coined the phrase the somewheres versus the anywheres, which goes a long way to explain Brexit and populism versus globalism. But he had an interesting thing to say on Radio 4 this morning, which is he thought that we are in a state of general unhappiness in the Western world, or particularly in the United Kingdom, now, compared to, say, the 1870s or the 1900s. We are in a very dark place of the national soul. And he was explaining why this possibly is. Even though back in the 1870s, there were lots of economic and social problems brought about by becoming an industrialized nation. There was rich people, poor people, extremely poor people. And we have a welfare state now. We have a lot of state education and things, but it hasn't brought us happiness compared to our predecessors, who seemed a more cohesive bunch. Now, why is this? Well, it could be argued, Goodhart made a very good point, that back then, and for most of our history, we've had various things that underpin our society that give us a kind of sense of common purpose, a sense of unity. So that would have been the church, even though there were lots of different strains of Christianity in Britain. Catholicism still very much looked down on and repressed for the most part. But the schism, say, between the Church of England and Methodism in particular was not as pronounced. It seemed to be coexisting. The Methodists quite happy being outside of a state religion, but at the same time doing things and being active in a way that would influence the state Church of England, Anglican branch. So you had that underpinning our ancestors' society, but also a sense of national unity. Pretty much everybody was patriotic to some degree. At times it became very jingoistic, but that kind of ebbed and flowed. The intensity of that feeling, but the belief that the United Kingdom was a good thing for its people, and that everybody was happy to be British for the most part, was a persistent idea. We don't have that idea at the moment. We have the globalists saying, running the country down. We've got people saying there's a borderless world. We saw that sign up on a high security fence at Glastonbury this week. Oh, the irony. In fact, Glastonbury does a good job of erecting walls to keep people out. Glastonbury built the wall and they got Hampshire to pay for it. Maybe they should advise the US government on building such a magnificent wall. But the thing is that we don't have that now. We don't have a sense of national purpose anymore compared to our ancestors. And he was saying that also social mobility back in 1870 was a different thing. It wasn't dependent on education. It could be, as long as you could read and write and do sums, you were okay for life. But because of the industrialization and the huge rise in the mercantile class, you could apprentice somewhere, but come from quite humble origins, an apprentice, and then sort of set yourself up in time as a person of business, and you were kind of judged on merit and achievement back in the 1870s, which is not so much the case now. Goodhart was saying that um, one of the things is that the key in our current day and age, the key to social advancement is education, and tertiary education at that. So it's funneling lots of people's experiences into this bottleneck of education. Well, you've got to go to a university and get a degree before you can be said to be successful. This is a very success in peer terms. Back in, say, 1870, your success was based on achievement. This is where you were, and this is all the effort and hard work you put into it, and if it's rewarded, you are judged at the level you achieved. Of course, there was always a social class thing. You could never sort of really buy your way into the aristocracy unless you arranged a very profitable marriage between an impoverished lord and your very eligible daughter. But you provided the dowry and the money and all that. So you could do it that way. But now everything is funneled through education, and it creates an aspiration bottleneck. And that success is seen through the eyes of education. So what if you don't go through the university system and you get out there and you just make your own way in the world? Well, the way our society is now, we look down on that kind of person, even though that person might just set themselves up in business and do quite well. By 1870 standards, if you had somebody in the 1870s looking at somebody who didn't go to university in 2019 but was able to use their money to make a successful business, they would be amazed at the way the metropolitan university educated class looked down on that person who didn't go to university. So that was a very interesting thing. I did catch up with it on the BBC. You can go to the Radio 4 website. David Goodhart's point of view. I think he raised a few good points there. And finally this week, we're going to cross the Atlantic to America. Well, I was so happy. I was being so happy this week. You see, it's not all doom and gloom, hey? In a little classical liberal sphere, because what happened in Congress was that Google had to appear in front of two congressional committees, one in the Senate, one in the House of Representatives. And it's been doing around. Footage has been doing the rounds on YouTube. Thoroughly recommend these two. And it's Senator Ted Cruz in the Senate grilling a Google executive, and Representative Dan Crenshaw grilling Google executives in the House of Representatives, and both make for fascinating viewing. Different styles between the two men as well. Cruz was kind of more like he was more a cross-examiner. He took a kind of lawyer approach to it, and he had somebody, I can't even remember what their title was AI development, something like that. It was not an easy to remember job title, but in the cases of the people that appeared in these hearings on behalf of Google, Google seemed to be bringing people from the typing pool and saying, you've got to answer Senator Cruz's questions. They just seemed completely out of their depth, lost at sea. And this is in response to the leaked documents from Project Veritas and the leaked video footage from Project Veritas, which showed that Google has been manipulating their search engine. By extension, they own YouTube as well, because they don't want another Trump situation where somebody like Trump wins, or perhaps even a proper conservative winning in elections. So this is Google effectively meddling in elections, and this is very serious. Now, nobody at Google out and out denied that these things happened. I mean, the footage is plain to see. But the person who Senator Cruz was grilling did not know this other executive at Google who said these things about manipulating things so that another Trump situation would happen. So the Cruz one was good. and she kept. I don't know if any Americans can tell me, is this normal? But every time Cruz asked her a pretty cutting question about this leaked footage, she always responded with, "Thank you, sir. Thank you, Senator." It was kind of obsequious. I don't know if you're required, like in British Parliament, you address somebody as my right honourable friend or the right honourable member of whatever. But that seemed weird, and she was completely out of her depth, didn't have all the information, and Cruz was very sarcastic to her. But Representative Crenshaw was a different matter, because here was a congressman, an elected representative, and the words that he used, how he articulated the problem of what Google has been doing and the attitude that they've taken. He articulated what we, in that kind of classical liberal sphere, have all been saying. It was like, there's an elected politician who is saying the things that if we were in his place, we would say. It was so brilliant to watch. And all the time, I'm getting more and more impressed with Dan Crenshaw. Okay, because there is... he's a tough cookie, but at the same time, he never loses a sense of grace. There's always a sense of grace about him. When he was mocked on Saturday Night Live by Pete, what's his name, and then Crenshaw went on and just absolutely, Pete, what's his name, just shrunk to an inch high and was in awe of Crenshaw. And Crenshaw didn't raise his voice, didn't rant, didn't, sort of shitpost or be a shitlord. He was so gracious, but he won. And this is the same thing. He was going at this Google executive saying, you are calling Dennis Prager, Jordan Peterson, and Ben Shapiro, Nazis. Okay, this is ruining the Discord. It's untrue. It's ruining the Discord. How can anybody have a proper political conversation if you're just labeling people as Nazis? And the Google exec just looked like a rabbit trapped in the headlights. Absolutely hopeless, floundering. But Crenshaw's just very calm, but no less forceful method. It sounded so refreshing. Here we are, the thing that we've wanted to say to Google to their faces, and they always hide behind the walls. Crenshaw articulated it on behalf of all of us, and just watching Google squirm. This can't be the end. This has to be the beginning. But finally, to see that somebody in elected office is on our side and is batting for us, it's just fantastic to see. And now I'm going to take a biscuit on that note. Dan Crenshaw, I love you.